Hello, and welcome to ARTFul Insights. I'm Shane Farrell, the Digital Projects and Programs Manager for ARTZ Philadelphia, and together you and I are going to look at some art today. This video is produced in partnership between Dementia Society of America and ARTZ Philadelphia. Each month we offer a live program where a small group of people talk about a work of art or works of art from museums and cultural centers around the country. It's a different museum or cultural center each month, and in addition to that live program, we also produce a video like the one you're watching right now. We look at the same works of art as we did in the live group, but with the video it's 30 to 40 minutes in length. You can watch it any time, day or night, that might suit you, and it's an opportunity to have a more intimate, self-driven conversation about the art. I'll ask a few questions to get us started, give you a few things to think about. I'll share some of the observations and thoughts that folks from the live group brought up that I think might be interesting for you to consider. But really, this video each month is about you. It's about what you see in these works of art, how you respond to them, and just having the opportunity to look at a work of art and think about it at your own pace. If you're watching this video with someone, please feel free to pause from time to time if you'd like, so that you can have your own conversation. If you're watching on your own, we're delighted to have you, and it'll be a conversation just between the two of us. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the museum or cultural center that we're visiting today. Welcome to ARTFul Insights. So, here we are at the art space we're going to be visiting today. This is ArtYard. It's located in Frenchtown, New Jersey. It began in a former dairy barn in the founder's backyard. Jill Kearney and Stephen McDonnell, who are the founders of ArtYard, hosted literary events, music events, theater and dance events in a kind of improvised space in a barn in their backyard. And after doing this for about a decade, they founded ArtYard in 2015 as a nonprofit, as a way to formalize these experiments. They chose a location in Frenchtown, New Jersey that was a former electronics warehouse and abandoned egg hatchery. It was right by the Delaware River. And ArtYard officially opened in 2016. It hosted 93 events in its inaugural year. And here's a fun detail. When they opened, they had a giant egg sculpture as a way of making reference to the egg hatchery they were inhabiting, which hatched and revealed a big flock of puppet and costume birds. I actually have a picture of this giant egg sculpture. Here's the egg that was on the opening day of ArtYard. ArtYard works a lot with local and emerging artists, many of whom are getting their first opportunity to show or perform. Over time, the organization has grown a lot in its staff and programming, and as a result, they opened a new building in 2021 at the foot of the Frenchtown Bridge, which is where they're still located now. Admission to the gallery is always free of charge, though donations are suggested. And Frenchtown's only an hour away from Philadelphia, so if you're in our local area and you want to visit, it's not too far away, and you can access the galleries for free. And now that we've learned a little bit about ArtYard, let's take a look at the artwork we're going to be looking at today. In this case, I should perhaps use a different word. We're going to be looking at something bit different than what we're used to. Today we're going to be looking at shoes, but we're going to be looking at very interesting pairs of shoes. ArtYard had an exhibition called Shoes, a Love Story that was full of strange and unusual shoes. So It might be a little different than what we're used to, but I think we're still going to have a very fun conversation together. So why don't we take a look at some shoes? So here we are, taking a look inside the galleries of ArtYard at a very unusual shoe. So before I say anything about it, I want you to just have some time to take a look at it, take it in, see what details you notice about it first. And once you've had a chance to kind of make your own observations, we'll come back together and we'll have a bit of a discussion about what we see. So now that you've had a chance to look this over, I wonder what you noticed first. There's a lot of strange details here. Maybe doesn't look like an average everyday shoe that you or I might wear on any given day of the week. So what caught your attention about it first? I'd love to hear your first observations. Well, one of the things our participants in the live group discussion on Zoom noticed was that the shoe is a very unusual shape and has kind of two parts that we might not normally see on a regular pair of shoes that are jutting out from the side. There's kind of a pointy toe at the center, and then there's two other pointed parts that are extending out from either side. Was the shape of the shoe something you noticed first as well? And why do we think this is in such a strange shape? What do we think this shoe might be used for? Who would have worn it? And is there anything that this shape reminds you of? Well, one of our participants in the group discussion said you could use this shoe to dress up like a pigeon. You might need a shoe like that. And that's an interesting observation as we look at this shoe and its three pointed toes. It might kind of look like the foot of a bird. Would you agree with that? Do you think this looks like something a bird might wear? Or maybe not a bird, but a person pretending to be a bird. It does seem kind of reminiscent of that shape. If you've ever taken a look at a bird's foot, they kind of have usually three pointed toes that stick out like this, depending on what species you're looking at. But why do we think someone would want to wear something like that? And who would that person be? Well, one of our participants in the group discussion said, if you took the two sides off, you might see some gentlemen wearing that down in the city. And that's a good point. If you took away the kind of unusual extra toes we have here on this shoe, it could look like kind of a fancy dress shoe that you might see someone wearing walking around just anywhere. A bit of extra flair with the color, perhaps, but still, without the extra toes, it might look like a relatively normal shoe. What do you think? If you took the extra pieces off of this, is this something you might wear out and about? It's a little bit adventurous, perhaps, but maybe we have some adventurous people joining us today in this discussion. Another person said, I feel like it goes to a costume of some sort, maybe a bird or a duck or something. And someone else said, could be a chicken. So a lot of people seem to seize on the idea that this belonged to some sort of bird costume. Do you agree with that? Do you think this is a part of some sort of bird costume? And why would someone want to dress up like a bird? Why are they wearing this? What do we think they're doing when they're wearing this? Well, something that we talked about a little bit in our group discussion was that the person that's wearing this might be a part of a circus. Someone said, where I lived in Maine, we would have traveling circuses, and my parents would let us go out to the traveling circus by ourselves when we were children. They traveled town to town, putting up a tent, and we would go see the circus. And this looks like something that a circus performer might wear. Maybe some sort of clown or someone dressed up in some sort of bird costume who's performing at a circus. And someone else said, yeah, I think this is from the Barnum and Bailey circus, and it's specifically from a character who was a chicken clown. They apparently went to go see the Barnum and Bailey circus every year, so they were very familiar with some of the characters that were in that circus, and it looked familiar to them. They think that's where it came from, and it was worn by this particular character. So this led us all to talk about experiences we had visiting the circus, and I'm curious if that's something you've ever visited in your life. Have you ever been to a small local circus or maybe a big one like the Barnum and Bailey circus that we mentioned? And when you were there, did you see something like this? Was there a character that had some sort of crazy shoe on? Maybe it looked like this, or maybe it looked like something entirely different, but was still kind of strange and interesting. Is that something you've ever seen before? And did you enjoy going? It seemed like everyone in our group had very fond memories of going to the circus. But I know a lot of people who also didn't like going to the circus and found clowns and those sorts of things a little bit scary. So what was your experience? Well, after we had talked a little bit about who might be wearing this, what purpose it might be for, and all those sorts of practical questions, we started to just kind of talk about the shoe itself the same way we might talk about a sculpture, a painting, or something like that. We just started observing details about it. Are there any details about this that particularly stand out to you? Well, one person in our group said, kind of looks like chili peppers or banana peppers. And we all thought that was a kind of funny observation because, yeah, it kind of does something about the shininess of the material, the shapes of the elongated toes, and the color kind of looks like a pepper. It looks like a pepper you might pick in your garden. Another person said, they're really not my color. What do you think? Is this a color that you enjoy, something you might wear, or is this something you would choose to leave behind color-wise if you saw it on an item of clothing? It's a pretty bright, vibrant color. How would you describe it? What word would you use to describe this color? A lot of people in the group seem to think this was kind of a bright yellow color. Is there a particular shade of yellow that you think of when you look at this? And as we were thinking about the color of the shoe, we also started to observe the material of the shoe. What kind of material do you think this might be made out of? And as you're looking, what kind of details about this give you the idea that it might be made out of that sort of material? What properties of it are you noticing that are leading you to that conclusion? Well, something I mentioned a little bit earlier was that the material looks pretty shiny. It looks like the light is really reflecting strongly off of this material. So one of the people in our group discussion said, I think it might be patent leather. And if you've ever seen a pair of patent leather shoes, they're very shiny. It's a very finely finished sort of leather that's very reflective. Maybe you have a pair of patent leather shoes in your own closet right now. It's a pretty popular material. What do you think? Do you think this might be patent leather? Does that seem right to you? Another person said maybe it's some kind of vinyl material or some kind of plasticky PVC type material. That could be a possibility too. What do you think? And another thing that we might consider as we're considering what material this is made out of is how the shoe's constructed. Do we think you could make these sorts of shapes out of these materials? It's an unusual shape, and the construction of it is very strange. So do we think these materials would work for that? Someone said, the polish on it is really interesting. I'd like to touch it and see if it's really smooth or very crackly. What do you think? Is this something that looks like it would feel smooth to you? Let's zoom in a little bit on it and take a look a bit closer at the material. So as we get a really good close look at this material, what do we think it might feel like? It's interesting that this person said they wanted to find out if it was smooth or crackly, because to me it kind of looks like it's both in different parts. If we look kind of close to the sole or in different parts where the shoe has been worn and we see bends, it looks a little cracked to me. But if we look at other parts, like up here, where we see this shine, it looks very smooth. And I wonder if that gives us any insight into anything about this shoe. What do we think that might indicate? Well, something I think it might indicate, and you can tell me if you agree or not, is that these shoes have actually been worn quite a lot. We see that the material here kind of has these folds in it. It has cracking at certain points, as if somebody wore these for a long time and walked around a lot, and they got worn in. They look like they've been worn quite a bit. They don't look new. Have you ever had a pair of shoes that you've worn for a really long time until the material that they were made out of started to kind of crack and gain a sort of patina from all the walking around you did? I know I've had pairs of shoes like that. Do you agree? Do these look very worn in to you? And it's kind of interesting to see a shoe that's so strange being so worn out. It's not something you would think someone would wear so often that they could put this much wear into it. Usually shoes that get really worn out are kind of everyday shoes that we wear. And I don't know about you, but to me, these definitely don't look like an everyday pair of shoes. Another question we asked ourselves as we were looking at these is, what do we think it would be like to walk in these shoes? They're kind of strange. Do you think you'd be able to walk around normally in these? Someone in our group said, you'd have to be very careful with those things on the side. You could trip really easily. And I would agree with that. If I imagine myself wearing these shoes, I think it would be kind of tricky. You might run into things unexpectedly. You'd have to be really careful. What do you think? Do you think these would be easy to walk around in, or do you think it would take some getting used to? Well, we actually have a second picture of these shoes. Why don't we take a look at that to get a little bit of a different perspective? So here's the other picture of the shoes. So is there anything different you're noticing in this picture? Someone in our group discussion said, this one doesn't look as shiny as the first one. And I would tend to agree with that. It doesn't look as shiny to me. I wonder why that is. Why do you think that might be? Do you think the shoes are made out of a different material? Or do we think the lighting might just be a little bit different from this angle in this photograph? Someone commented that kind of looked like the same material as a boxing glove. And then a number of other people started to agree. They said, it looks like a boxing glove. Yes, it does look like that sort of material. Is there something that the material reminds you of? Maybe you agree it looks like a boxing glove, or maybe there's something else entirely that you've thought of when you're looking at it from this direction. What do you think? What does it make you think of? I think it's also interesting to look at the shoe from a different angle. Before, the shoe was kind of sitting flat on a surface and we were looking down on it. Here it's kind of stood up on the edge of something. And I wonder if looking at it flat on the surface versus looking at it stood up like this makes you notice anything different about it. Does the shape of it look like something different from this angle? Does it remind you of anything else when you look at it in this direction? To me, when we look at it from this direction, it kind of takes on the life of a sculpture. We're used to seeing shoes kind of flat on the ground like that. But when we stand it up like this, to me, it feels a little bit more like something sculptural. And when I look at it, I kind of see a person with their hands up in the air. I wonder if there's something like that that you notice when you look at it from a different perspective. It's funny how just changing the position of something can really change quite a bit about how we look at it and what we think it might represent. Does this feel different to you in this position? Or do you think it's just the same thing I was looking at before? Nothing's really changed about it. I'm curious also, as we continue to look at this, if maybe you have any strange pair of shoes in your own closet. Maybe not something quite as extravagant as these, But do you have a pair of shoes that you bought just because they were unusual or interesting? Maybe not something you walk around in every day, but something you think about more in the way we might think about an artwork? People like to collect all sorts of different things, and that's sort of what this show came from. The person who put on this show at ArtYard was really interested in different pairs of shoes and collected them over the years. So maybe you've done the same thing at some point in your life. There's something you've collected that we might think of as a normal object, like a pair of shoes, something we have around every day, put on every day, but you can find strange and interesting examples of. Is there something like that in your life that you collect or that you have interesting examples of around your house? That leads us to ask kind of an interesting question about what's worth collecting, what's worth putting in a museum. What is art allowed to be? Can it be anything we want it to be? Or does it mean something specific? So I wonder if when you look at these shoes, you think they're a work of art? Or do you think they're just a strange pair of shoes? Well, unfortunately, we don't know a ton about this pair of shoes. We think they're from a circus performer, but with shoes, unlike artworks, sometimes we don't always get all the information. These were found from all over the world, all different places, and they didn't always come with information about who made them or what purpose they were used for. I'm pretty confident that these were used by some sort of circus performer, but we don't have a ton of other details other than that. So knowing that is kind of interesting. There's kind of a bit of a mystery attached to these. Who made these and what did they use them for? Clearly not for some just sort of everyday walking around, but maybe for some type of special occasion. And the person who made them, I wonder what we could learn about them. Were they just a shoemaker who got a very strange order from someone someday? Or did they specialize in making these sort of strange, almost art object-like pairs of shoes? What do you think? Since we don't know a lot of details about where these came from, what kind of story do you tell yourself when you look at them? What kind of details do you make up about who made them and who wore them and how they maybe ended up in the hands of a collector? It's kind of fun to have that ability to just speculate and make up our own stories. A lot of times when we look at paintings, we also come up with different stories about what we're looking at. It's kind of interesting we can do that when we're just looking at a shoe. Maybe to you, looking at a shoe is less interesting than looking at a painting, or maybe it's more interesting. It's kind of out of the ordinary for what we like to look at in this program. What do you think? Do you like looking at kind of different objects like this? Or do you prefer to look at more traditional kinds of art? Well, no matter what your preference is, I hope that you enjoyed looking at this together with me. I hope that if you had a fun time taking a look at this today, that you might come to one of our group programs that happens on Zoom once a month. You can register at artsphilly.org, that's arts with a Z, and take a look at our event calendar for all the programs we have coming up. where you can join with a group of people over Zoom and talk about some fun artworks or maybe even a pair of shoes. I want to thank Jessica Howe and Megan Van Dyke from ArtYard for making this program possible. We were very happy to get a look at such an interesting show. The show was curated by the founder of ArtYard, who I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Jill Kearney. She's been interested in shoes her whole life, has this big collection. So, though we don't necessarily know a lot about the origins of every pair in the show, we do know a bit about the collector because they're the founder of ArtYard. So I hope you had fun looking at this today. I want to thank you for being here with me, and we hope to see you again either on one of these video programs or at one of our live programs that takes place over Zoom. I'm Shane Farrell, and this has been another episode of ARTFul Insights.